Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, the final episode of Season 2, Episode 20. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, it's been quite the 20 weeks for both of us and retail history. I mean, from the lows of uncertain prospects to the end of the pandemic, change of administration, economic uncertainty, to now what looks like a blockbuster forecast and the nowhere to go but up. We've got the vaccine. We've got great percentage of the populations, at least in North America and major centers, vaccinated, so we can see the end zone. Goalposts keep moving around a little bit, but what a difference 20 weeks make.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Certainly never a dull moment in retail generally, but particularly over the last 15, 16 months. And yeah, everybody I'm talking to is pretty excited about the future. I think for the most part, things are coming back, at least in the U.S., more quickly than people expected. And just a lot of tailwinds that hopefully will carry us forward to a good second half of the year.
Well, there's no question. Timing is everything. And talk about timing. Speaking of the retail revival, actually the overall economic revival, the NRF just updated their forecast in terms of where they saw the economy going and where they saw retail going. And they're pretty blockbuster numbers. And we've got a great guest to talk about the overall context. Matt Shay, president of the NRF.
I'm super excited to talk to Matt. But before we move on, though, we should just briefly mention what we're doing for Season 3. We'll share more details as that's coming into play. But we will be kicking Season 3 off July 6th. And we've got a blockbuster interview with Brad Stone. Some of you may know has written, I believe, the most popular retail book of all time, The Everything Store, about Amazon. And he now has a new book out, his second book about Amazon, which is called Unbound. So we will be chatting with him and what he sees for the future of retail, but a lot of really great inside stories and insights about the retail behemoth known as Amazon.
I listened to an interview with Brad, and you talked about why a second book. And he said, listen, the first part was just getting Amazon off the ground, but so much has happened. The growth of Prime, growth of AWS, the transformation of Bezos as a leader to begin with. So I'm excited to talk to Brad. I think it's going to be fascinating. So many things have happened in such an influential organization. The more we can understand, the better. And we're wrapping up, speaking of which, so let's get back to this episode. So we are wrapping up the episode in style with Matt Shay, president of the NRF. We talk about big picture objectives. We talk about the tradecraft of what an association like the NRF does. We talk about all he has this lens on retail where he's not only just on the Capitol and the executive branch, but he's also talking daily to leaders, CEO level leaders. So it's a great perspective that we're thrilled to bring to the podcast, and what a great way to wrap up Season 2.
Well, Michael and I are excited to welcome Matt Shay, who runs the National Retail Federation. We're looking forward to having him close out our season. And as is our custom, Matt, we'd love to start with you just telling us a little bit about who you are, a bit about your personal and professional journey and the work that you do at the NRF, and then we'll dive into some more probing questions.
Well, thank you, Steve and Michael. Nice to be with you both today, and happy to have the conversation about a topic that we all love, retail. And I'm really privileged to be the CEO of the National Retail Federation, which is the association in the U.S. that represents the full breadth and diversity and scope of the industry, all shapes and sizes of companies, and all segments of retail. And I've been the CEO for about 10 years and been in Washington for almost 30. And it's been really the highlight of my career to be involved with retail. And I love the people and I love the issues in the industry. So really happy to have a chance to talk.
Well, we're happy to have you here. And it's certainly a dynamic industry, maybe a little bit more dynamic in the last year or so than we would have liked. But so I imagine many of our listeners know a decent amount about the NRF, but we actually have quite a few listeners from outside the U.S., which doesn't mean that they don't know about the NRF. But maybe you could just explain a little bit about the organization, the mission, and some of the key focus areas.
Well, the NRF is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and our primary purpose is to speak on behalf of the industry with elected leaders and policymakers and regulators, primarily here in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, but also across the states in the U.S. and in many instances in other markets and with other regulatory and legislative bodies around the globe, and in partnership with our colleagues at other trade groups, as we would in Canada or in other places in Europe or South America or Asia or Australia, New Zealand, so all around. But the big show, our annual convention each January in New York, which will be held in January of 22, we're excited about that, is a wonderful platform for message delivery, but the NRF itself is a much bigger organization than that, with a whole series of other kinds of content activities on behalf of the industry and member engagement opportunities and networking and best practices. And the real focus, based on where we're headquartered in Washington, is to speak with elected leaders, policymakers about issues that impact the industry. So a whole range of things, but the big show is one of the more prominent events that we host.
I tell you, I had the strangest year this year. I've been going to the big show for 20 plus years, back to when I was in retail and HBC. And it was just the whole year was a bit off, because that was a start of many people's years. So we're really looking forward to that resuming. Let's talk about retail as an industry and its importance. I mean, we know its economic importance, but I'm intrigued to kind of think about, both retail as an industry as a barometer of the economy, and also its ability to change and both change and reflect society. Like, I think about decisions and movements some of the leaders in retail have made that have advanced topics in retail. What are those kind of key 2 or 3 things that you're focused on right now on behalf of the industry? Is it, I'm hearing a lot about cybercrime. Your breadth is quite wide, but what are the couple of things that really, really come up in every meeting with the CEOs that you meet with?
Well, I think the foundation is a recognition that as the largest private sector employer in the U.S. And as the industry that creates jobs for more than 1 in 4, approaching 1 in 3 Americans, before we went into the pandemic, the number was more than 50 million jobs in the U.S. were created as a result of retail through 3 million establishments and $4 trillion in GDP, which is more than 20% of the GDP in the U.S. There's a recognition that the retail industry has a special role to play, not only in job creation, but in getting Americans introduced to the workforce and creating career opportunities and building experiences that can serve them, whether a lifetime in retail or whether in other industries. And so the conversations that we're having now with elected leaders and policymakers in Washington is about the economic recovery. First and foremost, of course, has been collaborating both with the previous and with the current administration on fighting the pandemic and on keeping employees and associates and communities, customers safe, and supporting the distribution of goods and services through the supply chain, and keeping business open to the extent possible, and creating jobs. And so as we go into the next phase of what comes next, it's about putting people back to work safely, making sure they're equipped with the right skills to do the things that they need to do as the economy recovers and rebounds. And that includes a whole range of topics, whether it's on infrastructure or on immigration or on workforce development or on trade. I think there's a whole series of really interesting, relevant, and essential topics we need to discuss with the administration.
Like, pull the curtain back a little bit on the trade craft of what you do as an association. As I mentioned off mic, I've worked with and continue to work with Retail Council of Canada. So I have some insight into the comings and goings. I mean, you advocate for retail across multiple parties. You're party agnostic, I'm sure, and multiple different presidents. But how do you gather all those resources and continue that discussion? Is it backed by economics and just a bit of the trade craft? Because I think people we all know as retailers the big show and we know the name, but the sense of what you do on a day-to-day basis to advocate for, firefight, move things forward, respond, promote, push along. Give me a sense of the work you and the team do.
Well, I think there's the work that the professional staff does, which is the day-to-day relationship development that goes on between and among the people that do this, for a living, with the administration or with congressional staff or directly with members of Congress or directly with regulators at places like the Department of Labor or the U.S. Trade Representative's Office or the Department of Commerce or the Department of Treasury. And so that's all essential to having the relationships and having the trust and the credibility. And the real key, I think, is ensuring that those that are making decisions hear directly from the members, in this case from retailers, from job creators, from people who are out there in industry who are working with and living through the economic conditions, right, and the trade relationships and the workforce challenges and all of those things that they can speak to much more effectively and passionately and informedly because they do it every day for a living. And so I think the real opportunity in a job like the one that we have at the NRF is to make the connection between those that are seeking information because they have to make decisions on issues and those who have information because they have to live with the decisions that are going to be made.
I once described being an advocate as sometimes explaining unintended consequences. Would you agree?
That's certainly a part of it. I think there's certainly a dimension to the conversation that is to help those that think they have answers to questions understand that there's sometimes more to it than they initially anticipated, and helping introduce them to other possibilities. And sometimes we can do that directly, and other times, that can be done more effectively by letting someone else be the messenger and share an experience or a perspective that can be even more powerful because it's been lived by the person that is explaining it.
So, Matt, one of the newer issues, I guess relatively newer issues that the NRF has been getting involved with is on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front. And of course, we're in the middle of Pride Month. I'm curious how that all developed and what are some of the newer things that you're doing in that regard?
Well, I think if we go back to the recognition, just as a jumping off point, that the industry is the largest private sector employer in the U.S., and given the diversity of the industry, then the customers that retailers are serving, as well as the team members and associates for whom they're creating employment opportunities in the communities in which they do their work, is a reflection of this country and the wonderful mosaic of diversity that makes the U.S. such a unique and uncommon place. And so with that as background, I think the retail industry has always been a place that created opportunities, particularly for those that didn't have access to other kinds of employment and were able to, through the opportunities the industry provided, create experience for themselves in the workforce that would allow them to advance in ways that maybe that they wouldn't be able to in another industry. But I think particularly after the murder of George Floyd last year on May 26th in Minneapolis, that really galvanized many business leaders and in particular retailers to take, I think, more concrete, demonstrable, measurable action and to create something that's more sustainable and more durable. And that means changing things that happen not only in places of business and in physical retail locations, but also within those companies. And so it's really been gratifying to see the way the retail industry has stepped forward, and so many individual retail companies have made real commitments to support the Black community and to support other minority populations inside the U.S., and done so in ways that, whether that's employment opportunities or whether that's direct financial support for Black-owned businesses, or whether that takes the form of increased opportunities for experience within the ranks of management and leadership in companies, or commitments on hiring. I think there have been a whole range of approaches that different companies have taken based on the segment of the market they serve and the business that they're in. And we've been pleased to partner with Curate Retail, QVC, HSN, Cornerstone Brands on the Small Business Spotlight, where we identified 50 Black-owned businesses and gave them a platform to reach new markets through HSN and QVC, and a partnership that we've created with the National Urban League. So we've been and then throughout our own membership with a working group that now has almost 100 companies participating to talk about best practices in diversity and inclusion, and a CEO working group of our board. So I think, this time it's really actions, not just words. And I think that's the difference between, say, what's happened over the course of last year on diversity, equity, inclusion, and maybe what's happened in the past.
Well, it's such a great example of where, kind of this collective action, right? It's the power of a big industry getting together and using its influence, as well as being able to mobilize a diverse group of people. So let's make a little bit of a pivot, start looking towards the future in terms of some of the things that you've got coming up. We'll talk about what's planned for the big show in a minute, but there is another event, one of the many virtual events that you guys have put together, called NRF Converge, which I think is June 21st through the 25th, if I'm right about that. What's that about? What can people expect if they join in on that?
Well, we all wanted to be together in January of this year, a few months ago in New York, and we weren't able to do that for very sensible reasons. And we did a very successful virtual show in January, but we didn't get the chance to cover all of the content that we wanted to cover at that event, and we didn't have the opportunity to introduce as many of our partners and solution providers to retailers as we had hoped to, just because of time constraints. And so there was real interest in doing sort of a mid-year event and pulling together a number of communities, not only the sort of content we'd normally have at the annual convention, but bring together our loss prevention community, and bring together our marketing community, and bring together all of our associate members, and to do a series of more focused educational tracks and sessions that would allow people to find the content that really fit their needs and their areas of interest. So that's what Converge is. It's sort of a mid-year virtual event that we'll be doing later this month. And we've got wonderful pre-registration. The content is outstanding. We've got a number of really wonderful conversations with CEOs of companies scheduled, and with practitioners of certain disciplines inside retail operations, and with small business owners, as well as with a number of our partners and service providers. So it'll be a wonderful springboard to January of 22, when we will be together in New York at the newly expanded and fully renovated convention center in New York City. And we're very excited about that. And the team is already well on the way to putting together a really outstanding program in terms of content. The sponsor, partner, solution provider interest has been incredibly remarkable, and we're well on the way to another record performance in terms of the exhibitors, and we will be on the way on attendance as well. So we're very excited about all this.
Are you sensing some pent up demand amongst the trade to what the kids are calling IRL, right, in real life, and get together? But unpack for me a little bit anything you're going to be doing different in January globally the COVID crisis still continues in some countries. When I'm standing in the big show in January, any thoughts on anything different other than new renovated Javits Center? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's IRL and it's YOLO, right? And you only live once. So there is an enormous amount of pent up demand, and we've been very encouraged by the attendance that we had in January for the virtual event, and the attendance that we're going to have later this month for Converge, and that's in the face of what I think we would all agree is some fatigue for the virtual world, and a real desire now to get back to doing things in real life, in real time, in person. And so, of course, we will start by, of course, fully embracing all the appropriate applicable health and safety protocols that are in place by next year, and ensure that we've got the right approach to how we welcome people back, and do it in a way that makes them feel confident that their safety is our number one priority, which it is. And I think in terms of the content mix and the layout of the show floor, and the ability, because the Javits Convention Center has been significantly expanded with an enormous several 100,000 additional square feet of space, we'll have plenty of room to showcase certain topics and to accommodate more in-depth conversations in certain content areas, and give everyone plenty of room in which to do that and feel safe and healthy, and create some new experiences that people will really enjoy when they're back.
Well, I know I for one am definitely looking forward to getting back out there, getting back to New York, and we'll be sure to put the links to both the NRF Converge event as well as the big show in the show notes. Matt, I wonder, before we start to move to wrapping up, could you just step back and reflect on, obviously so much has gone on across all of retail and the way the NRF in particular has had to adapt. But for you, are there any big takeaway messages that you feel retailers need to be thinking about as we move ahead, or maybe any myths you want to dispel, or narratives that get played out in the industry that you don't think are super helpful?
Well, I think the big issue is the way in which the industry so quickly pivoted in the face of the challenges, and in the U.S. kept communities and customers safe, but continued in many cases service uninterrupted without having to shutter businesses or turn people away. And so that, I think that was, as a lesson of the pandemic, one of the more really reassuring elements, that it was clear that the priority was health and safety. And I think, to play that out some, there's also, I think, a really interesting conversation to be had, not only about how this changes retail going forward in terms of logistics and fulfillment and supply chain, and in terms of payments, and in terms of social engagement and interaction. There's a few different, I think, elements or broad categories that really demonstrated a very dynamic industry. The other was that, for a variety of reasons, we didn't see in this recession over the course of the last year the kind of bankruptcies that we experienced a decade ago when we went through the last recession. And in the last recession in 2008 and 9, there were more than 400 bankruptcies of retail companies in each year, in 2008 and in 2009, more than 400 each year. And many of those were actually liquidations. And this time around, there were about 60 over the last year, and the overwhelming majority were reorganizations under the bankruptcy laws of the U.S. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I think the industry is much healthier than it was a decade ago. I think the industry has evolved substantially, made dramatic changes in investments. The tax reform that took place in 2017 in the U.S. lowered the rate, made us more competitive, allowed people to reinvest in businesses. And then consumers really kept spending. Consumers were given extraordinary support, trillions and trillions of dollars in the economy that kept people spending, that kept businesses open.
And key categories were just on fire, right? I mean, I know here and I watch, home improvement and outdoor, and just as we adapted to the changes in our lives, it was a good time to be a bread maker salesperson. And,
That's right.
It was a different, it was very, to use Steve's word, bifurcated, right? You unfortunately had really strong demand in some categories and almost non-existent in other. Apparel really struggled, but it does seem to be coming back. So very different from an industry perspective and just from a consumer behavior perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that was the real key was the way in which consumers behaved and the substantial fiscal stimulus, but also the monetary stimulus here. Mm-hmm. And we were able to work very closely with congressional leaders a year ago and the previous administration, who did remarkable work and came together in a bipartisan way very, very quickly in a series of pieces of legislation enacted mm-hmm. in February, March, April of last year, and then at the end of the calendar year. And now again, this calendar year, that's just, at some point we need to have a conversation about how much is too much as we see the way the economy is coming back. But it certainly kept many people employed. And I think when the chapter in the book is written, will show that we saved millions of businesses and millions of jobs because of the actions that our leaders took so quickly.
I guess the finite or the finesse is making sure that there's enough people going back into the workforce at this point, right? I'm hearing, labor shortages as the economy starts to gear up again. So that I'm sure you're focused on that right sweet spot between supporting the economy and getting people back to work.
Yeah, I think it is a balance, and I think it's also like the traffic accident that occurs on the highway. You can clear the accident, but that doesn't mean that the traffic immediately starts flowing at the same speed. So we understandably have people that remain, at least in the U.S., concerned about health conditions and want to be sure that it's okay to go back to work and they can do so safely and they can commute and get there safely and they can work with their. That's important. We've got people that have children and family members and others that they need to take care of that would prevent them from going back to work right now. We still have this enhanced unemployment benefit that I think has contributed to a disincentive, and I think that's been widely acknowledged by people of both political parties that that's playing a role. So I think in the U.S. at least, we look forward to the children's return to school in later this year in September. We've got a bank holiday early in September, and it's after that is traditionally the beginning of the school year in the U.S. And I think by then we should feel much better about people's ability to be back to work, and we'll have hopefully cleared up some of the traffic jam that's slowing us down at the moment. And I think as we get into the holiday season, might be really exciting to have another conversation in the October, November timeframe about how's the supply chain doing, how are customers behaving, what do imports look like, are the ports cleared up, have we unloaded the container ships, what are we thinking for the end of the year holidays,
how much your pallets gone up in price,
that's right.
Craziness.
So
true. Matt, it's been such a treat having you on the podcast. Opening up and understanding the NRF beyond the headlines and getting into both the tradecraft and your perspectives has been really appreciated. Steve and I couldn't think of a better guest to wrap up our second season of focused on the industry we all love, which is retail. So thanks again for joining us.
You're very welcome, Michael. A pleasure to be with you and Steve, who's a longtime friend and of NRF and of mine, and privileged and honored to be with you, and wish you both the best and look forward to listening to some of your other conversations with other great guests, and hope to come back sometime and have another discussion.
Welcome to our last edition of Remarkable or Forgettable for Season 2. Steve, let's kick it off kind of where we left off. NRF has put out their forecast this week, actually going up fairly significantly in terms of where they see the U.S. economy and where they see U.S. retail wrapping up for the year. What do you think?
Well, I think the range they've got is increase of 10.5 to 13.5, something like that. So huge sales increase. If that comes true, that would be a record for the U.S. since 1984. So that's pretty big news. And I think it certainly speaks, I'm not an economist. I don't have enough of a perspective to say exactly what I think about those numbers, but I think it definitely lines up with a lot of the momentum we're seeing in the economy and consumers' willingness to get back out there and spend, and the effect of stimulus and all those kinds of things. So, my history, I guess, in looking at these forecasts has been that the NRF tends to be on the more optimistic side. So given that history, I might feel like maybe the lower number is closer to what we might see. But this is such a volatile time. I think it's, it's really hard to pin down. And I think that's why they gave a fairly big range compared to what they did. But it's exciting. I hope we hit anything close to those numbers, if not even better.
Let's talk about RH, the former Restoration Hardware. They like to be known as RH. They've got their earnings exceeded expectations. We've talked about that. What do you think?
Well, to me, I'm a little bit of a broken record on this. RH is one of the most remarkable stories, I think, in retail over the last few years. I talk about them quite a lot in my book. I think they are just firing on all cylinders. I mean, there's no question they've got a headwind, given how strong, or tailwind, I should say, given how strong the home categories have been. And their numbers are in comparison to having a bunch of their stores closed last year. So the increase in and of itself is not super remarkable, but the way they just keep cranking out this record performance, opening these beautiful stores that, a lot of people thought they were crazy, including myself, that they would invest so heavily in physical retail. They're going to be opening, I believe, in London next year. So they've got international expansion. So, I mean, this is just a great example of a company that has really got a laser focus on their customer. They go deep on it, and they bring just this memorable experience as part of the whole equation. So pretty darn impressive. And I think their stock price reflects that.
All right. Let's talk about Microsoft. We were on this podcast talking about how they were closing stores, and now they seem to be opening stores again.
Well, allegedly, the information wasn't super specific, but I think what they had out there was not the least bit remarkable. So perhaps it's not so shocking that they're going to reload on this. Remains to be seen whether they'll be able to do a better job at it this time. A bit forgettable at this point. I think it's, if Warby Parker can open 150 stores, you'd think Microsoft, with the products they sell, could probably have a few that would work. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's particularly remarkable. They probably can get better lease terms and those kinds of things than they were sitting on the stores they built over the past decade or so. So just more to come, more really one to watch to see what this move looks like and whether it's much different than what they did before.
All right, Chewy puts out numbers and seems to be optimistic that the pandemic puppy trend, or at least the annuity that you do for these businesses when you buy a dog or a cat, and they're going to last several years. So that's like buying an annuity for pet stores. What do you think of their results and their forecast for the pet business?
I had kind of a mixed reaction to this one. I mean, when you look at their numbers in terms of sales being up 32%, they posted some great numbers in terms of customer activation. It's the second quarter that they've made money, which, there's a lot of these kinds of companies that don't make money. So from that standpoint, you could say it's remarkable. But at the same time, it's like a perfect storm for this kind of company. The shift to e-commerce, the pet buying behavior. And so 32% increase to me was not really that's kind of in line with where overall e-commerce is. And if they can't make more money when kind of all the stars are aligned in terms of organic traffic and underlying trends, it bodes well, because I don't think it's going to get easier going forward. Maybe we got another quarter, kind of interesting comparisons, but certainly to get to the back part of the year, it's not going to be so easy for them to outperform the industry and drive profits in the way they have before. So I was kind of a little perplexed, actually.
All right, so you put them in the doghouse for that one. Let's talk about Stitch Fix. So Stitch Fix, a wonderful company with buried in a bit of the fashion drag on the fashion business, but a great direct to consumer data science company. And they put out their earnings and getting into resale. Talk about that.
Well, very cool company. They've been a bit of a volatile company in terms of their sales performance and profitability, even going into the pandemic. So their sales increase, which I think was like around mid 40s, I think, given what we know about apparel's rebound in and of itself wasn't super exciting. But they did manage to make money, which has been a challenge for them on a base that's relatively low. As you mentioned, they're going to enter resale, which it seems like, if I don't enter resale or you don't enter resale, like we're going to be the only ones who haven't entered the resale business in the last month.
Yeah, or at least put it in a press release anyway.
Yes, exactly. So Remarkable Retail Podcast and Fashion Resale. I think it's a great idea. I'm going to raise $750 million on the basis of that. They've got a very unique value proposition, and some new leadership coming in. And so I think they're an interesting one to watch. Again, I hate to be a bit of a broken record on this as well, but it's very hard to make sense of the apparel numbers really right now because the comparisons are so easy. So is 40 good? Is 50 good? Is 60 good? I'd like to see these comparisons done like many retailers look at them over 2019. That gives you a better sense of not a perfect, but a better sense in my mind. True, and I believe theirs were up relative to 2019, but they're the sort of company like Chewy that's a relatively new company and is acquiring a lot more customers. So that's you would expect them to be up, right. Whereas Macy's, Kohl's, you might go, oh well, they're very mature. So it's like a same store metric, right? You got to look at by percentage of the same customers. If you're spending all your money acquiring customers, it's not like for like numbers, right?
Yeah, but I think both with Chewy and Stitch Fix, there certainly have been some pretty positive kind of underlying customer dynamics. So, that should bode well for at least future sales, whether they'll be able to really improve their profitability. It's going to take us really another probably 6-9 months before we can really start to make better sense of that.
All right. Well, that's our last edition in season 2 of Remarkable or Forgettable. All right, Steve, take us home.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our guest interviews and insights, and new episodes will show up every week. And please take a minute to drop us that elusive 5-star rating and tell a friend in the retail industry. I'm Steve Dennis. The expanded and completely revised second edition of my best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, is now available at Amazon, Indigo, bookshop.org, or just about anywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast, and you can learn more about me on LinkedIn or on meleblanc.co. Steve, have a safe week.